Hi, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy on Passion World Talk Radio. I want to thank Jeanne for being producer and writing the blog. Please read the blog. I have a very special guest with me today. I interviewed caregivers with various types of dementia. This month, May, is Awareness Month for ALS, and I have with me today a wonderful caregiver. My heart goes out to her and her family. I want you to hear her story, and I want you to listen and share this audio cast. This is very important for you to listen to. I want to welcome Kristen Roden. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you on. And I want to tell the listeners, I met you last year on your group, Positively Grateful Caregiving. That's the name of it. I hope I'm saying it right. And I just found you so inspirational. Could you please tell us about you and Adam's story? Your husband, Adam, I believe was 30 when he was diagnosed with ALS. And I really would like for you to share how he was diagnosed, and you're a young woman and you have 2 young children to raise and caregiving, and my heart goes out to you, and I want people to be aware of ALS.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me here to share our story, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So
you're welcome.
Yeah, like you said, my husband was 30 years old. We were parents of 2 young children. Our youngest was about 6 months old, and our older son was going on 3. He was about 2.5 when Adam first started having symptoms. So it started when he was outside. We live in Minnesota, and he was out hanging Christmas lights. And, of course, it's very cold here in early December, and his hand started kind of not responding. So he'd come in and let it warm up and then go back out, and he kept having this issue with his hand not really working properly, and a few other symptoms kind of slowly crept up, and we thought it was probably carpal tunnel. If not carpal tunnel, it was probably a pinched nerve. And I'm, working full time. I've got 2 little kids. His issues were so low on my list of priorities that I could not have thought that it was anything serious, just based upon his overall health and condition. He was otherwise very healthy, very athletic, very, no other health concerns that would have been a red flag that something serious was coming. So he first went to his primary physician, I believe it was February, so a couple months after that, those first symptoms presented, and they weren't able to find anything based upon the studies and the exam that they conducted. Passed him off to a neurologist eventually, who had identified some symptoms that looked like it could be ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And I still remember him coming home from that doctor's visit. It was in March of 2015. And I had very casually just asked him, well, how'd it go? Not, again, thinking that anything serious was coming. And he looked at me and he told me that she thought it could be ALS. And I kind of looked at him dumbfounded, what is ALS? I remember there had just been this big ice bucket challenge, but didn't really resonate with me. And he said, Stephen Hawking, that really smart guy that's in a wheelchair and talks through his computer. It's yeah,
right.
That's ALS. And it was a whole ton of bricks just hits you thinking, what does that even mean? And of course we go to Google because, that's what we do. And the first thing that pops up is a life expectancy of 2 to 5 years. And everything changes before your eyes.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. That had to be so devastating to a young family. What is don't mean to interrupt you, I'm just curious. What age does ALS start? Is there a particular age group it affects?
Yeah, so typically it affects those in their 50s, 60s, in that age range, or older. So getting the diagnosis at 30 is even more uncommon than the disease itself. It's not unheard of, and through living in this world, I've come to meet several other families that have been diagnosed around that same age group. So it's certainly not impossible. Obviously, it's happening to us, but it is on the early side for average diagnosis.
Yeah, I myself did not know that somebody could have it that young. So this is a learning experience for myself also. Please go on. I'm very interested in what you have to say, and feel free, spill your guts, speak your truth. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that March appointment was the first insight that ALS could be what he's facing. It was not an affirmative diagnosis. It was just that neurologist's initial findings based upon everything else that they'd already conducted. And ALS is a disease that they can't diagnose by any positive test. It's basically ruling everything else out, and then they do an EMG, and in that they can find various nerve and muscle disruptions that indicate it's ALS. And just for your listeners, ALS affects the nerve cells that go from like the brain to the spinal cord out to your muscles. So basically those nerve cells, those motor neurons, begin to die, and it causes all voluntary muscle tissue and usage to die. So I'm no doctor. My medical knowledge is limited, but that's kind of the gist of it. So over time, as those motor neurons are dying, you lose all usage of your voluntary muscles, and eventually your lung capacity diminishes, and that's kind of the fatal outcome, is that you no longer have the ability to breathe independently or functionally. So, but back to our story. I digress. We were referred then to an ALS specialty clinic, and about a month later we had our visit there, and it was a long day of Adam getting poked and prodded and pulled at, and reflexes were tested, and just a whole slew of exams and going through his symptoms and all of that. And that doctor agreed with the other neurologist that it likely was ALS. They wanted to run a handful of more tests just to confirm it wasn't, a few other diseases. And then a couple months later, we went down to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where they gave us a second opinion that, yes, it was ALS. And it's an extensive diagnosis process. It's very overwhelming. It's very, having no real medical history or any real knowledge or expertise in the field. It was, first of all, just mentally challenging to, figure out and understand the disease and what was happening to him and why and what that meant for the future, but also then the whole emotional component of, we have these two little kids, our whole future, everything is supposed to be going right. We're following all these steps for a beautiful future, and here you go with this diagnosis that just slaps you right across the face. So it's a very devastating blow, for sure. Very surreal, very desperate to not believe it, to think that there has to be something else, that they're just not seeing things right. But it was ALS, and like I said, you're given kind of 2 to 5 years as the average life expectancy, and Adam just passed 5 years. So he's doing fairly well, all things considered, for where most patients would be at this point, post-diagnosis. And
Kristen, I'm in awe of you. How do you I mean, I was a caregiver, okay, for my mother-in-law and Matt, and that was, with the mind. And I used to wonder, I don't know which is worse, the mind going, you have your body, or your body going and you don't have your mind, vice versa. How do you handle the caregiving stress? Do you have someone to help you?
Yeah, so, before COVID, we had one aide who would come in 1 or 2 days a week and be with Adam just to give me a little bit of a break. But Adam's mind is fully present. Like, the disease will affect and cause dementia in a small portion of ALS patients, but Adam is not affected by that. And that helps a lot because he can, at least help manage like some of the mental workload of caregiving or of our life. So yeah, we had our one aide, but since COVID situation began, we stopped having her come primarily because I'm home full time now. Anyways, the 2 kids who are now 5 and 8, he just turned 9, 5 and 9, are here full time too, but it feels manageable, and we didn't want to bring in, an additional layer of risk with having an outsider come in if we didn't need to. So, and also aside from the caregiver or our aide, we had a lot of help on kind of the fringes of life. So a lot of help with the kids because, I'm also a mom of 2 young kids who have a lot of energy and activities and schoolwork and places they want to be and just all of the demands of that, as well as friends that would help with cleaning or bringing meals or doing laundry, just household tasks, outdoor work, that kind of stuff, just all the things, anything to take something off my plate. It didn't necessarily have to be related to Adam's care, but just the overall list of responsibilities as Adam's needs grew. He needed more help and was able to help less around the house. So where he used to be able to do most of the outdoor work and even bring the kids to daycare and help with meals and cleaning, it's all the things that he used to be able to do. Not only are you losing like your partner and helping with those chores, you're also gaining more responsibility. At first it was like he just needed help buttoning things. He just needed help with things that required like just that fine motor skill. And then he wasn't able to really mow the lawn because he didn't have like the endurance or the stamina to do it long enough. And it was over time that things piled up more and more on my plate. And I think part of the advantage to being the slower progression is that we've had time to adjust and time to make changes to our routines and how we do things so that we were able to adapt effectively and not have everything thrown on at once. And as the kids have grown older, they've obviously demanded still a lot of attention, but in less ways. I'm not changing diapers anymore and trying to help Adam. I'm not dealing with like a toddler who doesn't sleep at night. And so it's kind of been as the kids have grown and their needs have gone down in many ways, Adam's needs have increased. So it's kind of just been a teeter-totter of just balancing between what the kids need and what Adam needs and trying to find the right balance, making sure everyone is being tended to. But we've definitely had a lot of help. I mean, this is not a situation that I think one person can do independently.
Right. That's a lot.
Totally.
That's a lot to deal with. I really admire you, and now you have homeschooling to add to your task. How are you managing that, homeschooling?
Yeah, so I think we had 2 weeks before in Minnesota. They closed the schools for 2 weeks while the teachers kind of got all their stuff together and figured out how to make the distance learning work. During that time, it was hard because we were going off nothing, and to fill 2 weeks of time with a 5 and 8-year-old, and knowing too, not only are other places closed that you can't take them to the trampoline park or wherever to help burn off energy. I also can't even go, like, we're still limited in how far and how long we can be gone to do other things outside just because I can't leave Adam and Adam can't come with. And, like, there's so many dynamics that you're really extra stuck at home. But those first 2 weeks were really challenging, just trying to keep them focused and not fight all the time. And it just once we started this formal distance learning, it got a lot better because my older son has adjusted very well to that, and he's able to do most of his distance learning independently. It takes him a few hours during the day, and then the rest of the day is like outside, or there's video games or other screen time because it's just hard not to. Our younger son's in preschool still, and they do give him some curriculum, but not a lot, and he's a little more hands-on. So it's hard to try to be like their friend and play with them and keep them activated and engaged in life and all this, and not get worn out by that or not.
Yeah, that's a lot. You have a lot to deal with. I have so many questions for you, Kristen. I just can relate to you somewhat, only because I was a caregiver, but of a different disease. Yeah. And yes, my son was older, but you do have the added responsibility because now it's you who are doing everything. And I didn't have young children. My son was an adult. So I say with Alzheimer's that children are the hidden casualties of this disease, and people don't want to recognize children's needs. Mm-hmm. How are your children dealing with their father's disease, and how are you helping them with that? Do they get counseling? Well, virtual, it would have to be virtual, but how are they dealing with their father's illness?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that's kind of all they've known. Like Eli, who's our 9-year-old, he says he remembers Adam when he could still like walk and run. And we have, videos of him throwing both boys up in the air and catching them and, biking with them. And but it's been so much of their lives. Like Wesley was 1 by the time Adam received his final diagnosis. So it's, by the time, any of Wesley, who's 5 going on 6, he really only remembers Adam being in a wheelchair. And same thing with Eli, where he has some other memories. Most of the time, Adam has been in a wheelchair or not been able to play.
Oh, okay. So this is how...
Yeah, so it's kind of their only frame of reference. Although I do think, they obviously know and understand that, like, Daddy's in a wheelchair. Daddy needs a lot of help. He can't do a lot of the other activities that most dads can do. But Adam has been healthy in the other sense, in that, like, we haven't had hospital stays. He's not bedbound. He gets up. He plays video games with them. He interacts with them in a degree that I think that they still have such a good relationship with him that they don't see the disease so much as like, and they don't see like the illness of it being like a terminal outcome. It's really more just that he's confined to the wheelchair and we have to adjust our life to help him. And we can't do a lot of things because of that, and they understand that. And I think that's hard for them. It doesn't weigh on them the way that I would have expected it to, or at least not in a way that really comes out. I had Eli set up at school with a counselor. He didn't want to do it. He didn't understand why he needed to. He didn't felt he needed it. So we try to be open with it and let them ask questions, and it just kind of is what it is, and we'll talk about it. We don't hide it. But I think so much of it is we try to set like a positive, loving home, and that's who we are, and this is what our family looks like, and there's nothing to be ashamed of or I don't know. I guess they seem to be very resilient to it, and they're good helpers when they need to be. I'm sure it affects them in ways that they don't speak about it, but at the same time, they seem very well adjusted to it, and we don't try to create extra drama around it where it's not necessarily needed. Just try to keep things like real, but also positive, and be grateful for what we have, and we, still get out and do things when we can. Obviously right now that's different, but that's kind of the approach we've taken to it, to not let it define our life or limit theirs any more than it needs to.
That is amazing. And Kristen, you are a great role model. This can be for a person, a family with any type of illness, to take what you're saying, which I just love. You are being positive. You are setting the tone for your family. This is, how it is, and you're loving, and you're showing an example. You're teaching your children compassion and empathy. And I, compare it, I only have Alzheimer's to compare it to, but children who are in that environment of seeing their parent change with a dementia, it's up to the parents to say, you know what, this is how mommy or daddy is, this is the situation, but we will still be positive and loving. And I think that's important, and having that open communication with your children is very important, no matter what type of illness is going on. I think that's just, awesome, how you are creating that positive environment. And children are very resilient, and children really don't think sometimes at that young age of something is wrong. They just accept it, and they kind of take people under their wing. And I just, any situation, you can either make someone or try to be a better person, or you could be a bitter person. And same thing with we teach our children about a situation like that. How is Adam handling all this? How did he deal with it when he was, a young man, 30 years old, and your whole future ahead? And I just can't even imagine getting news like that.
It was a very devastating blow. I don't know that I can even put into words what it's like to face that. For me as his wife, but then for him to, to suddenly look at your life, and now when you think you have everything in front of you, and now there's,
right,
it's reduced to a handful of years, not decades. So yeah, it was a very, very difficult news to reconcile with. And one of his biggest things, what we just were talking about, was that deciding how to share the news was like the next biggest heartbreaking piece, because while you kind of have time, and we'd heard those words in March, and we didn't tell hardly anyone that we were looking at that diagnosis until after he had his second opinion from Mayo in June. And then even then he just decided he didn't want to have it, quote unquote, ruin the summer. We do this big family trip every year, and he didn't want that to be the focus of it. He didn't want to weigh people down with it. He just wanted to feel normal for kind of as long as he could. And his symptoms were not obvious. You could not, if you looked at him, you wouldn't have known for that first stretch of time, because it was really just in his hands and in his wrist. But it wasn't. He could still walk fine. He could still speak fine. All of that. So it was really a matter of trying to decide how close to hold that news, rather versus who to share it with. And you kind of know once you start letting the news out, it's gonna just spread. And we wanted to control that message. But that was a very difficult time to figure out how to share that without having to like relive that initial grief all over again, because you think you kind of have come to terms with it or starting to accept it, and then you see it in all of your loved ones like going through that whole shock and disbelief, and everyone's asking you if you had this other test done, or are you sure it's not this, or I heard the story of somebody else who thought that they had this, but it was really that. Maybe you should look at that. And just all of these things that just kind of disrupt you again. So that was a challenging moment as well. And then, he kind of started putting together his I'll call it the bucket list. He wanted to go snowmobiling out west, so he put together a trip for that. We did Disney World twice. We went out to California to visit some friends. He started kind of putting together those things that mattered to him, and we found a home that was better suited for the disability, and then eventually he quit work. And I think it was like each step along the way, you're grieving along the way, you're losing something, knowing that this might be the last time you get to do something, or the last time that
yes.
The last.
Yes, I can relate somewhat. And, you don't think, like I didn't even think of myself. I was in my, 10 years ago, I was 52, going to, the lawyer, power of attorney, advance directive, all this stuff. And here are you, a young couple, and you have to face that. That is beyond heartbreaking to me. I can start crying just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Did you go to a lawyer and do that?
Yeah, we already had, generic wills in place, but we needed to tighten everything up and kind of get things in a better position. So, yeah, we did that. And one of the big things with ALS is having an advanced healthcare directive that's really tailored to the situations that ALS will present. So, primarily, should he end up with pneumonia in the hospital and it comes down to it, does he want a trach? What level of interventions does he want down the road, rather than like putting those decisions on me as the caregiver in an emergency situation? And I think coming to that conversation was very difficult, and for him to really sit on that and make his decisions,
it's hard.
Was very emotional. Yeah, that was very tough.
Yeah.
And then even, it's like, even at what point at what point is life no longer worth living? And how do you make that decision now? But all of those decisions you have to weigh in light of a diagnosis like this, where people can literally get like shut into their bodies and have no means of communication. It's a really brutal reality when you have to look at it at the like nitty-gritty situations that could ultimately befall us. So
yes, and I say that you're doing a wonderful job. You are what I call a kick-ass caregiver warrior. You are definitely kicking ass. There's no cure for ALS. There's no cure for Parkinson's. There's no cure for Alzheimer's. People need to know about these diseases. They need to know the reality of these diseases and put a name and a face to this disease.
Right.
Can people go on your Facebook page, Kristen? And
absolutely, yes.
See your family, because you have a beautiful family. And I really encourage everyone, go on Kristen Roden's Facebook page, Kristen Roden. Look on Kristen's page and see her beautiful children, handsome husband. And you were interviewed for Oprah magazine. I read it.
Yeah.
On caregiving. Congratulations. That's awesome. I was reading it, and so true. You know, you had the double whammy now of dealing with the COVID and, like most caregivers, facing the social isolation that caregivers had experienced before COVID, and now the rest of the world is catching up on it. I just really like the article, and, you know, listeners can go on Kristen's page and you can see this article. I just really want to thank you, Kristen, for coming on and telling your story and Adam's story of dealing with ALS. Can you say what symptoms there are to look for in the beginning for people?
So, absolutely. ALS will typically present in one of two ways. So in Adam's case, it's called limb onset, which means that the disease is starting in one of your limbs. In his case, it was his upper body, in his arms, his left hand specifically. So typically, like grip strength or wrist weakness was like his first symptoms. A lot of times it'll be, if it starts in your legs, like stumbling or tripping, difficult walking. Most people will also have what are called fasciculations. It's muscle twitching. It's a really weird symptom. People will get it for other things. So like most of the time, fasciculations are probably not ALS, but it is a very common symptom across the board for anyone with ALS. So the other way that the disease can present is called bulbar ALS, and that's when it begins in like the mouth and throat region. So if somebody is having difficulty speaking or slurs, has a difficult time chewing or swallowing, anything like in that region, that can be indicative of bulbar ALS. So those are usually the beginning stages of the disease. And there's a lot of good resources out there. The ALS Association puts out a lot more, specific information from a medical standpoint. And there's a lot of really great local resources that we've had that have helped us manage the disease and the progression and stay ahead of it. Without their expertise, it would be just even that much more difficult. So we're very grateful that we have the support in the community that we do.
And I also read that you have to battle, insurance companies. I mean, and not as if you don't have enough to do, that you have to battle to get Adam a medication that he needs on, when someone's that young, is Adam on Medicare or
Yes.
Social Security?
Yep. So
disability?
the ALS diagnosis puts you on like the fast track to qualify for disability and therefore Medicare. So it was such a terrible learning curve, and I hated it. Trying to figure out
I can imagine
what to do with insurance and Medicare and how disability works. And he had a long-term disability insurance policy through his employer, so like how that works with Social Security disability and just all of these that is just thrown at you, and there's no one there to like do it for you. So it's basically just like, here you go, figure it out. And it's awful. And
yes,
I'm so
it is.
That we have all that kind of past us in terms of getting those applications.
It's hard.
But insurance
and listeners need to hear this, Kristen. They need to hear that the reality is when you are faced with any kind of devastating disease, illness, you're on your own to fight with the government, fight with the insurance company, which is added stress.
And there's only so much time in the day, and I just always remember thinking like how grateful I was that I was working at the time, but at a job that provided me flexibility to like make phone calls in the middle of the day if I needed to the insurance company or the clinic to figure out what this charge was for, whomever. Like, it is so complicated, even when you're resourceful and decent at being an advocate for yourself. You know, there's so many people that would absolutely get lost in the shuffle if they don't have that flexibility or beginner knowledge of how some of these systems work. So it's like a whole new appreciation for anybody that has to do this all the time. Like, that was
yes,
and
yes, and yes, and you do have to be an advocate. And this is what I tell people all the time. You have to lose your inner inhibitions, and when it comes to your family and yourself, you have to stand up and speak up, because otherwise nothing will get done.
Right.
And, you know, you are a great advocate for your family. What are you doing for Kristen? What are you doing for yourself, self-care, to stay sane?
Yeah, I have certain routines. I work out almost daily. That's really critical to me. Just at home workout, streaming it online. But getting that movement in and like getting that, I don't know, adrenaline rush or whatever you call it, helps a lot. It's from both just releasing whatever tension, but also kind of empowering and keeping me in touch with myself. That's big to me. And, you know, COVID, like, I know the stay-at-home, it presents a lot of difficulties for sure, but it also has freed up some time because the kids don't have activities that I have to run them off to. So it's given me more opportunity to read. I really like to read, and I just haven't been able to for the past couple of years because it's been too busy and constant. Getting outside, fresh air, even just playing with the kids, you know, anything where you just don't have to, I don't know, where I can just kind of relax and let my guard down. When we were able to visit friends, I would try to get in some play dates with the kids and, you know, mom dates with my girlfriends. That hasn't happened as much. We've had a couple Zoom calls, but I feel like I'm able to get enough time for myself most days. Some days it doesn't happen, but understanding that you have to prioritize yourself, and if you don't, no one else will for you. So you just do, and eventually everyone kind of falls into line with it, understands what you're going to do, and they don't always like it.
That's
the kids
true.
all the time are like, we need your help, and I just tell them they have to wait. So they get used to it.
Very true. You're a prime example of, yes, you have, you know, 2 young children and a husband that needs your care, but you're taking time for yourself, because if you don't take time for yourself, you're not going to be any good to your family, which is
Right.
what caregivers need to realize. I don't care if you're a male caregiver, a female caregiver, who you're a caregiver for, self-care is vital. I say it's vital for your health and well-being to survive a caregiving journey.
I tell them, if I don't do this, I'm going to be a lot crabbier, and you're not going to like me. So just let me do it. We all win.
That's right. That's true. I used to say to Matt and Josh, if I don't get sleep, you know, I'm a witchy woman, and I don't want to be a witchy woman. Not pretty.
Amen.
You know, not pretty. We do have to take time for ourselves, which is utmost importance. Kristen, I want to thank you so much for coming on Chatting with Betsy today, sharing your story. Is there anything you would like to leave the listeners with about ALS, or what you would like them to know? Any words of wisdom?
Regarding ALS, you know, it is considered a rare disease, but I think almost everyone seems to know someone who had it. And I think it looks like an intimidating disease if you know somebody who has it, but I guess I would just encourage people to ask questions about it if you do have somebody in your life that is touched by it, or reach out and offer to help in a concrete, meaningful way. Or just don't be afraid to contact that person. Like people, because speech and communication is hard for that person, and they become more and more recluse as the disease becomes more and more. And I think people get intimidated on how to communicate with that person, and it just makes it a lonelier experience. So I would just ask that if you know a family affected by it, that you consider reaching out and being a support, even if it's just an ear or just a simple thinking of you. That can mean a lot when those families otherwise feel somewhat forgotten because they're out of sight, out of mind. So
absolutely right, Kristen, and that goes for all caregivers of any type of illness. Please, listeners, reach out to a caregiver and honor a caregiver. A simple hello, thinking of you. Can I bring a dish over? Leave it at the front door or your back porch. Very, very important. Before we close, I do have to say my son's friend, mother, had ALS, and she started, Joshua's friend told me, with coughing and trouble swallowing. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking of my son's friend's mom who started that way. And, read up on this disease, listeners, and, if you know someone who has it or someone who's taking care of someone who has ALS, reach out to them and be a friend. Thank you again, Kristen. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Passion World Talk Radio. Please check out Kristen Roden's Facebook page. It will be in the blog. Please read the blog. You can contact Kristen on her via Facebook. You can contact me on my Facebook page or through the station. I have a group, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. Anyone's welcome to join. Kristen has a group, Positively Grateful Caregiving, which is on Facebook. I would suggest joining that. And just to be kind to people, stay home, wash your hands, wear a mask out in public, and shine your light, because you know what? In this day and age, we really need it. We need people to shine their bright light. Till I talk to you again, this is Betsy Wurzel. Bye-bye.